Hello to you and yours. This is a vocational podcast. Welcome to episode 17. If you're a returning listener, you already know the vibe. You're part of the family, so please like, subscribe, and very importantly, share to someone you believe this could be profitable to. Someone you think could use this knowledge. And if you're new here, I'm glad to see you. I hope you're glad to see me too, and my guest, of course. Today, we are sharing our time learning about what exactly it is a professor does. So I'm going to allow my guest to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Natoya Peart. I'm an assistant professor in biology at the University of Waterloo.
Welcome, Professor Peart.
Thank you.
So, how was your drive down here? I know we've kind of mouthed about it already, but how was it?
It wasn't bad. It was just a lot more traffic than I expected, so it added 5 extra minutes to my drive. So that was not fun. And then, sometimes there's some crazy drivers on the road.
Oh my goodness.
Like people not using their signals.
Do not get me started.
They use their hazard lights to stop.
Do not get me started.
Yeah.
At least twice today, someone has tried to get into my lane without indicating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you want to be in an accident?
I know.
Is that what you would prefer for your day?
Yeah.
Let's be civil, maybe. Yeah. But every time that happens in Kitchener, I always believe that they're not possibly Kitchener drivers. They have to be from the GTA. They are not Kitchener drivers. I refuse. Did anything fun or unexpected happen during the course of your week so far?
Not really unexpected, but fun. I was on a panel as well as a guest speaker for an Alliance for Cancer Care Equity event on Saturday, and so that was good. It was to help raise awareness for the fact that while cancer does not discriminate, care can discriminate, and so you want to be aware of what you should do, what resources are available, if that early screening is best.
Early screening, you say. So what should I say, age range of people do you think should get screened as soon as possible?
So the Canadian or Ontario standards for different types of cancers has an prescribed age. So for example, for breast cancer, the screening age starts at 40. For colorectal cancer, I believe it's 50.
Okay.
But if you are high risk, that is if you have a history as well as the fact that you may have a mutation that indicates that you are likely to develop the disease, you might fall into the high risk category, so you can be screened earlier. But you should also just really be aware of your body and really, really advocate for yourselves, because a lot of times you'll go to the doctor and they'll be like, no, you're too young. And then there's so many stories that we're hearing these days of people going and the doctor says, no, you're too young, and then you get a diagnosis later on that could have been prevented. Well, not necessarily prevented, but could have been caught earlier.
Interesting. So my audience is usually of the younger age, I would say. So what kinds of, I guess, precautions or just screenings would you recommend?
So I think
early 20s,
early 20s. As soon as you're an adult, I would just make sure that you're being aware, get your gynae exams annually, get your do your breast self-examinations on a monthly basis once you're a menstruating female, or if you're a male, then talk to your doctor about what you should do. And then for your colorectal health, well, that one's a little bit difficult, but try to eat right.
Eat your greens, people. Eat your greens. All right, we're going to go right into the in-office session. Okay. I'm a student facing cheating allegations. What is my professor thinking, and what should I do?
Oh, that's a really great question. So it depends on the stage.
Good. So I'm going to read the stage.
Okay.
Hello, professors. I'm a student who is facing cheating allegations. Let me explain. I had a statistics exam on Monday. Sadly, on the day of the test, my car was towed, causing me to be 30 minutes late to a 50-minute lecture, giving me just 20 minutes to complete my exam. I explained this to my professor and started my test. Now, on the previous 3 quizzes, I performed well, honestly, but on this particular day, I was extremely stressed from the chaos of being late and the time crunch. I crave academic validation terribly, and confidence I could have completed more questions correctly. Then, there was about 2 minutes left until we had to turn in our exams. The girl next to me was checking over her work, and I noticed she had an answer that I did not have. I will admit, I copied that answer onto my exam before handing it over. Today, my professor, who is the sweetest old... I'm not going to read that part because I don't think it matters, but he's a man, handed back tests and told me to speak with him after class. I knew I failed this before he gave it back, and lo and behold, I got a 38 out of 100. I spent the whole lecture distracted and horrified about what he wanted to discuss. When we spoke, he told me he noticed I didn't do well, and that one of my answers was the correct answer for a second version of the test. I wasn't quite sure what to say, so I just began apologizing and told him I had 15 minutes to do it and was stressed, and it just happened. He ended it by telling me to study harder and to do better on the following exams. That was it. I do feel terrible about this. I am not a habitual cheater. I was just caught in a moment of desperation and made a poor choice. Now I am back from class and I'm spiraling in my head about my future in the course. I checked his syllabus where the academic integrity statement is, saying that any suspected cheating will be reported and stay on my academic record for 2 years. He didn't mention this to me, however, so I don't know if I am wrongfully worrying about tarnishing my record or not. So my question is, how would you feel in this position as a professor? Based off of his reaction, do you think I should worry about being reported to the dean? And lastly, is there anything I should do other than never repeat a mistake to make amends with my professor? I debated emailing him, but do not want an admission in writing that I cheated. Should I go to office hours and apologize? I'm just at a loss and freaking out so bad. Any input would be helpful. P.S. I am fully aware that cheating is wrong and all of you will feel that way, but I really don't want to be completely... He doesn't want to be, I guess, further reprimanded.
Okay. One, I'm glad that you recognize that cheating is wrong, and you did yourself a disservice because it was the second version of the test. The professor was pretty generous with not just giving you an outright 0, but it could be the fact that you already failed it, so it wasn't going to do anything.
It didn't matter much.
It didn't matter much. Also, the professor might give you some leeway because of the fact that you've been a good student, otherwise you've been doing well, otherwise on the exams or the test you mentioned 3 others, and this was an aberration. So in all likelihood, if you've been going to office hours, if you have a good rapport with the professor, if the professor sees that you're working hard and this is really, really an outlier, then they'll probably give you a lie. They'll let it pass this one time. I would do what you say, and perhaps go to office hours and just do it in person and say this is never going to happen again. I can get why you don't want it in writing, and clarify whether or not the professor is going to report it. Professor might not, because of the fact that you have a history of being a good student and this is an aberration and that it's one instance that it happened, and it's one test that it's not going to, depending on, like, for example, the class policy, you might have we'll drop your lowest grade 1, or
like we'll average it. Like if you got like maybe 90, 80 in the other
if you got above average in the other 3, you're probably fine. And if there are other tests, that you'll probably still work out fine in the end.
I believe there's like one more exam.
Then they should be fine. I would just focus on what the professor said, study, and do your best on the next exam.
I wonder, like, if he does email the professor though, like, and the professor has it in writing, does that kind of bind the professor to reporting it?
That I don't know. It depends on the school policies, and it depends on the school policy. It might.
Fair enough.
It might.
Fair enough. Well, people, please don't cheat.
Yes.
You paid good money to learn, so do not cheat. Next one. Ready? Attendance accommodations. Hi, I'm hoping to get a professor's opinion on attendance/deadline accommodations. Since this is Reddit, and Anon, I feel comfortable sharing. Long story short, due to my bipolar, actually diagnosed and treated disorder, I tend to have about 1 week, occasionally longer but not often, every semester where I hit an extreme depressive episode where it is next to impossible to get out of bed, much less leave the house or have enough energy to do any assignments. I have been extremely resistant to the idea of accommodations because I don't want to be perceived as making excuses. But my therapist and prescriber think that it's a good idea because it's something that no matter what I try, I simply cannot control. I absolutely would not abuse it and will try my hardest to not use it, but I think I'm starting to come to terms with the fact that I may need accommodations. The statistics on people with bipolar and graduating college are somewhere around 16%. And I think this may be part of the reason why, and I refuse to become a part of that statistic.
I would advise you to definitely use the accommodation. It's there for a reason. It's not your fault. You're getting help, you're being treated, but this is something outside of your control. And it's something that people should be raising awareness for, the fact that you have something that you can't help. But you're doing your best, so use the accommodation. No one should judge you for that.
I 100% agree. You know, like, well, I'm not going to say thankfully, but I didn't ever need such kinds of accommodations when like I was studying. But are you aware of any such accommodations, at least within the college or like the company?
Yes, so there are accommodations that are administered through the accommodations office, and so students can get accommodations for a variety of things. We, the professor, don't have to know exactly what the accommodation is for. They just tell us that the student needs accommodation, and then usually what this affects is usually testing. I haven't been in a situation where there are accommodations such as missing a week of class, but most of that's just generally affecting testing. And what I usually do for my lectures is that they're recorded and available online, so the students can always, if they miss a couple of days, they can always get access to it.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know. So the next one says, I nearly sent my entire freshman section home today. The reading schedule is posted online. I get to class. I tee up a really, yes, in fact, she wrote 3 reallys, easy question. The answer is literally the same name of the chapter. The answer is literally written on the board. I drop easier and easier hints. Silence. I finally asked if anyone actually read the assigned reading. Nothing. I nearly just sent them home right there. I asked what was even the point of me starting the lecture. Teaching freshmen sometimes really gets to me. I'm grading their assignments now, and it is clear that not one of them even cracked open their books. The highest assignment grade so far is 80%. I've been teaching this exact class for over 10 years now. I've never seen it so bad. I don't know what it is I am supposed to do. The class is too big for daily written assignments. A colleague recommended in-class quizzes, but she has had issues running those. Do I just do my best and find fulfillment in other areas of my life?
I sympathize. I can understand completely where they're coming from, because yeah, it happens. Student engagement can be very low in some things, and it doesn't necessarily reflect. You can let it affect you and how you feel about yourself. Even if you tell yourself, even if you know for a fact that student engagement is low, but you put your effort in, so you want to see some reception from the students.
Yeah.
But I would try the in-class quizzes.
But the class is so large.
Also, there are many different ways of doing in-class quizzes, so it doesn't have to be like a written quiz. It can be like an iClicker type thing or a VVox thing, just to test student engagement with the material. What I do in my lectures, I have what is a VVox activity, which is a sort of a polling activity.
Okay.
That one's anonymous, and so it's not counted for a grade, but you can always have it so that the student will have to log in with their information and answer the question during the lecture time.
Yeah.
And it's less than 30 seconds, and it'll count for a grade.
Oh. I didn't know that. You know,
and
so
then
like
use like an iClicker as well, and each student assign an iClicker.
Oh, interesting. So like, if I don't know, it doesn't record. It does record their names rather, and
Yes.
their like student IDs, and like, I don't know. At the end of the day, if you wanted to use it for maybe 1 point, maybe 2,
Yeah.
could you?
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. At least like if someone's filling the class for exactly 1 mark, it could be like, remember the iClicker?
Yeah.
You can get that. You don't have to come back here. Okay, and our final one is titled, At What Point Do We Say No? I have a student this semester, very nice young man, super passionate about what he wants to do. The only problem is that he has some severe mental disabilities. He can barely speak or write in complete sentences. Short, simple conversations are fine, like how are you doing, do you want to get lunch, etc. However, anything even slightly more complicated or that requires critical thinking is very difficult for him. He says he can't write or read, which I think what he means is that he can't do it in an in-class setting. He technically can, it just takes a very long time for him to process the information. His midterm grades were posted, all classes were D's or F's. He's gotten to the point where he's expected to think more critically in his classes and apply what he's learned to new ideas and concepts. At the beginning of the semester, he had one of the longest accommodation letters I've ever seen. For testing alone, his accommodations were twice the time, or rather 2x the time, someone to be provided to read the questions aloud to him and write down his answers, and minimal distraction room. However, since now he's basically failing out of all of his classes, I got an updated accommodations list. 3 times the time. By the time, I believe this post-term means like the time allocated for the test.
Yeah.
Formula sheet, word bank, scribe and reader, minimal distraction room, headphones with music, short breaks during testing. At what point do we just tell students that they are simply not able to do this? The above accommodations completely defeats the point of a test. I feel for him, I really do, but no amount of passion will change the fact that we simply never have a job in the industry. He will simply never have a job in the industry that he's interested in, which happens to be graphic design. He will be expected to clearly and effectively communicate with people on the spot, which he cannot always do. But of course, if I say that, then I am ableist instead of simply being realistic and sympathetic.
This is a tough one because it is a situation where the professor is aware of the realities of the environment that we're in, but we do want to strive to make our society more equitable and more just, but
Yes.
we still have to balance the fact with where we are right now. I'm thankful that where I am at the university, our accommodations for like test taking is handled by the accommodations office.
Yeah.
So I would not have to like do those accommodations in class. The student who requires accommodations goes to a separate building, they take the test there, and so it's handled all there.
Oh, interesting.
And so that actually would be the best way to handle that from this professor's point of view. The school should set up an accommodations office to take some of that weight off the teacher, because the teacher will then have to have a separate room, because sometimes classrooms are in high demand, so
Yeah.
maybe they won't have the 3 times time to be able to do that exam.
Yeah.
In terms of what is going to happen in the long run, as far as I'm concerned, yes, this might not reflect what it is, the reality of the world, but if there are accommodations that are made and it's in line with what the school policy is, and the accommodations are given, if the student can do the test and pass it, they're going to have to figure it out in the real world themselves.
Yeah.
My job is to make sure that you're prepared as much as possible, and so I can give you the information and you do with it what you will. It's sort of like a very hands-off approach. I'm inclined to I completely understand where the professor is coming from, because
Yeah.
at what point do you say no, this is
Yeah.
not the current reality that we live in, this is not tenable, this makes sense.
I don't think so. And
Yeah.
I feel like more than even just being able to say no, like how do you say no to someone who is, I guess, differently abled and is also spending a ton of money
Yeah.
to be there and a ton of time?
Yeah, because they're passionate about it, so they're interested in it. It's just going to be the challenge to get where they want is going to be a different road. It's going to be perhaps a longer route. It's not going to be the traditional way.
Yeah.
They'll have to carve out a path for themselves, and you're, as that professor, a person along that path, and it's up to you to see what your limit is in regards to how you can help them, because we're also people.
Absolutely.
You can't go above and beyond what you're able. Like I said, without the accommodations office, I don't know if I'd be able to accommodate all the different accommodations that students need, because I don't know what all of them are. I just know that students require accommodations. The accessibility office thankfully takes care of it.
Yeah.
So the exams just go there, and the student shows up and they do the exams at the accessibility office.
Yeah.
And I pick up the exams from there and I mark it.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to add that I try to be very cognizant these days that it takes very little for us to go to like well abled to differently abled. Like it takes one fall, one injury, one tiny accident, and all of a sudden you're in a wheelchair. And I really hope to spend my life learning. Like as soon as I retire, I'd likely just go to university and learn languages. No, really, that is my retirement plan. So I guess I read that question because it's a little personal to me, because I'm like, what is going to become of older people who are usually differently able or like just needing more accommodation,
because especially your body starts to break down.
Exactly. All right, and with that, we've come to the conclusion of our in-office sessions, and we're going to get right into the meat of our interview. It seems really cliche to ask, but why academia? So it holds true for most career paths that you could be making more money in the industry. So why did you forfeit that and go for academia?
Well, really, it's because of my perception of academia having a little bit more freedom in terms of I can pursue the kinds of science that I want, and it's not necessarily dictated by someone else. That says my science is dependent on funding, so it is dictated by the fact that if I'm not doing fundable science, I can't do my work. But I feel like at least I'm not at the mercy of a company who's telling me, oh, this is what we're focusing on, and then that can change at the drop of a hat if they're like, oh, we have different priorities right now.
But then the funding, doesn't it often come from companies, or does it also come from other sources as well?
So it can come from both private or as well as government. So for example, the tri-agency, so that's SHIRC, NSERC and CIHR are one of the major funding, or two of the major funding organizations, and then you also can have private collaborations to have funding for your research.
as well. So you really like that at the end of the day, if basically if one type of funding shuts off, you could always go put on a different type.
Yes, yes. I mean, you still have to ask a question that's interesting
Yeah.
for people to want to be like, why do we care about this? And I'll put money behind it because science is very expensive. But yeah, I like that freedom that I have.
I like that. And what's your interesting question?
I care about how does the way in which RNA is processed, so this is ribonucleic acid, how is it differently processed in our cells, and how does that affect how the cell functions?
Interesting. So like what could, I guess, depending on the answer that you find, how would that change life for, I want to say, the average person?
The average person. Okay, so very, very long term and very ambitious. But let's say we find an RNA that affects how it interacts with a particular RNA binding protein, affects epithelial barrier integrity in a way that we can target that specific interaction. So we can say we know this interaction between this RNA and this protein is very specific. It's restricted to this particular cell type. Let's say it's restricted to only your skin cells. And we can then target that interaction in skin cells, and perhaps you could treat something like eczema or psoriasis, things that are affected by epithelial barrier dysfunction.
Oh, interesting. So you're telling me that my skin can in fact be perfect at some point due to your research? That's what I heard. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but like, thank you, because like, for instance, myself, I couldn't do biology to save my life. As soon as I got the opportunity to like drop it, I was like, get away from me. So rate your work-related stress levels on a scale of 1 to 7. 7 being the worst, and 4 being manageable.
4.
4. What would you say contributes to that?
This is really an average, and so some days it's 3, 2. Okay. Some days it's 6. So it really depends on what crunch I have going on. So for example, last term was very hectic for me. I was teaching for the first time.
Was that the fall term?
The fall term, yes. I was teaching a course for the first time. I was also applying to 3 different grants. And then also, I'm from Jamaica. It was also when the hurricane hit Jamaica, so my family was affected. Right. And it was just a lot of things happening all at once in a very short amount of time. Yeah. And the fact that as I mentioned, science is expensive, so you want to get funding to be able to continue your work. Yeah. And so you're applying to grants, and you have to make sure that your grants are well written, they're scientifically sound. Yeah. You also have to prepare lectures that the students can understand. It was a large class. I didn't have any TAs, and so I did have marking assistants. So I did have students to help with marking.
That's not enough.
But making sure the lectures are ready, and then personal issues. So it was. Yeah. It was very stressful last term.
Well, what would you say kept you going? Like, what was the one thing at the back of your mind that's, I guess, you held on to, like, this will be worth it, this will be worth it?
The biggest thing, it sounds terrible, but I was like, the term will end.
There will be Christmas.
December will roll around. It will roll around. I will have marked all the papers. I'll have assistants marking all those papers. The grades will be submitted. The grades will be submitted on time. That was also a bit of a time crunch because the length of time between when the final exam is written and when the grades are due is very short.
I know.
And I'm like, I have marking assistants, but it's also people who have, grad students who have other obligations. Yeah. And so thankfully we're using this software called CrowdMark, so everyone can, exams are scanned in.
I have these CrowdMarkers.
Yeah, so you can mark it online, perfect. So you know how it is. So the marking assistants that I had, they could mark the papers at home whenever in their free time, and then it could be counted for it because it keeps track of the hours. Yeah. So we didn't have to get together in a room because that would have been hectic to try to organize.
It was hectic.
And I had 360
students?
320 by the end of the course, 320 students.
Wow.
And I decided to have written exams in terms of it's not multiple choice. So, yeah.
You know what? In defense of written exams.
No, I love written exams.
I do too.
Because a good multiple choice question is really hard to write, but also a good multiple choice question also really can test a lot of different levels of the education system or learning, or Bloom's taxonomy of learning, but it's also really hard to write. While a open-ended short answer question is really easy to write, and you can see where the student is getting from, and there's not something guiding them to the correct answer because you're supposed to understand the material.
Yes, and that's a very important point. I've never thought about it that way. But why I, as a really long-time student, really like the theory questions is because with multiple choice, you either get the mark or you don't.
Yes. There's lots of room for partial credit.
Yes.
With a short answer question.
With a
Because
short
I will
answer question.
read through and be like, they sort of get it. they didn't fully get it, but they sort of get it.
Get it,
So,
so,
0.5.
Exactly, exactly. Maybe 0.75 if you're feeling peachy.
Yes.
You know.
But if it's
Yeah.
a multiple choice is black or white, it's either it's right or it's wrong. There's
Yeah.
no in between.
There's no in between. So yeah, that's my little spiel about my love for theory questions. So what's your favorite part of your job?
Really, my favorite part of my job, I like the research aspect of my job where I like the actual part where we're asking questions and trying to design experiments to answer that question. I like designing experiments. I like designing experiments and figuring out how to answer this particular question.
Could you, I guess, give us a really simple experiment you've designed, or which is your favorite one so far?
I'll go with a really simple one, which is we're interested in this particular RNA binding protein, known as ESRP1, and we're asking the question, we know that when we knock it out in cells, it affects epithelial barrier integrity. And so one of the simple things that we can design, and we have designed in a couple of different cell lines, or done in several cell lines, is to knock it out using CRISPR and then plate in the cells and testing whether or not we see an intact barrier.
Okay. I really enjoy when people talk about the things they do, but even though I don't understand, that was very nice to hear.
So basically, we put the cells on a plate,
Yeah.
and put it in some liquid, and then we put electrodes on top of it.
Yeah,
and
electrodes I know.
Okay, and then test whether or not we are seeing electrical current passing through them.
Oh, interesting. And if an electrical current does pass, what does that indicate?
That indicates the barrier is compromised because intact epithelial barrier is going to restrict the flow of certain molecules.
Oh, interesting. And how does that, I guess, translate to what our skin would do?
So our skin is actually a barrier. So our skin is made up of epithelial cells, and we can injure this barrier in different ways. We can, if we get a bad gash, but then you can also think of minor injuries to the barrier where, for example, if we think about in terms of inflammation or something that affects the barrier, where it's sort of like it's not a huge gaping wound, but it's like each of the individual cells aren't forming as tight a connection as they should, and so you will have some leakiness.
Oh, very random question, but is that what are they called? Stretch marks are?
I don't think so, actually. I don't know, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, guys. This is rather out of left field, but yes, I tend to nerd out when I meet people who can explain things to me. So, what kind of personality would you say is not suited to a life in academia?
That's a very good question because I did what is known as the IDP, the Individual Developmental Plan, while I was in grad school. Did it several times, and based on my personality type, I'm not the type that's suited for academia because I tend to be on the shyer side and more withdrawn. I tend to work well on my own and not necessarily with others. But in order to be a scientist, you have to be very collegial. At least people tend to think of scientists as like the mad scientist who's just in the corner, but no, scientists is actually very collegial. You have to work along with other people.
Yes.
So I think the personality that would not work well though in science is someone who cannot accept failure.
Oh, failure of their students or themselves?
Both.
Oh.
But especially for themselves, because whenever you do an experiment, the important thing about an experiment is you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You can make a hypothesis, which is an educated guess. You can say, oh, I think this is what's going to happen, but you then have to test it. It could be the complete opposite of what you're going to do. A lot of science is like doing the same thing over and over again, trying to figure out why something is happening. And sometimes you have something that you think should work, and for example, we have this little cute, I have no idea what this is.
Yes, please feel free.
This cute little toy, and we say that, okay, I'm trying to sew it, and for example, I'm trying to sew it right here, and it's not connecting. I have to figure out why that's not connecting. Could it be the thread? Could it be the material? Could it be the needle? I'm going to try a different needle. I'm going to try a different thread. I'm going to try a different material. But you have to be willing to try it different ways and not just say, okay, it's not working, so I'm just going to put it down. It's just not going to.
To add to your point, you in fact have to try a different needle and a different thread for at least 4 years. If you plan to do a PhD, you have to try and fail for so long. So what would you say got you used to, I guess, failure?
I think it's the idea that it's not really a failure in the sense of it's, at least in science, one of the things it's not that the answer is just not what you it's what you didn't expect, but it's still an answer. It's not what you necessarily wanted, but it's still there, and then you have to figure out something else. Or the failure is, why did it not work? Trying to figure out why it didn't work. I think I like that a lot of the time, sometimes trying to figure out why it didn't work. Sometimes I get frustrated though, because when you are going through several different things and you get to a point where you're just like, I've gone through every possible thing that I can think of, and I cannot figure out why this didn't work. At this point, I'm just gonna put it on the back burner, work on something else.
Okay. Oh. Interesting. We spoke about funding earlier already. I wonder the people who or rather the people who you get the funding from, are they often invested? Do they have invested interest in you not failing, or are they I guess, used to the fact that within academia it's kind of expected?
It can be both.
Okay.
And so I think if you are, most of the funding organizations are more understanding of the fact that there could be failure. I think sometimes if you do go with a company, and I'm speaking purely from a hypothetical perspective because I've never been in this situation before, they might have a vested interest in a particular outcome, and that can cause compromise in certain ways, and so that can trigger conflict of interest because you can't necessarily, if you're vested in a particular way but you're not being agnostic to the science, where you're just like, it has to be this outcome, and you're not trying to see what are the possible answers and you're trying to force a particular answer, that can be very bad science. So I think if you're in that situation, you might want to reconsider.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing is that science and likely other likely other parts of research, including art, I'm going to presume, are malleable to different options. Yeah. I like that actually. So I have had the opportunity to sit in during the trial lecture for a prospective lecturer during my master's. So is that part of the interview process?
It is.
For an associate professor as well?
So it is, so assistant professor, and I know we'll get to this question later, but yes, depending on where you are and depending on the type of program you're applying for, yes. So for example, at Waterloo, it's a research intensive, but it's a primarily teaching university as well. And so you're, depending on what you're being employed for, you could be hired as a assistant professor, which is the traditional track of 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service. You might be a teaching stream assistant professor, which is 80% teaching, 20% service. Or you could be a research assistant professor or a research professor, which is entirely research and then some service.
Interesting. So within your assistant professor role, who are you assisting?
And so it's part of the ladder of the career trajectory. So you start as an assistant. So when you apply for a position at a university, if it's tenure track, you are considered an assistant professor tenure track. And then once you get tenure, you become an associate professor. And then after you become an associate professor, you can then get promoted to full professor if there's an availability for a full professorship.
Interesting. So it's just a name then. There's no actual person you're assisting.
There's no person you're assisting yourself. So and this is really a terminology that's specific to the US and Canada. I believe in other countries, it'd be called a lecturer.
Yes, because I was so I did my undergraduates in a different country, and you have lecturer 1, lecturer 2, lecturer 3.
Yes. And then they also have different criteria of the lecturers, because some lecturers are like a teaching assistant professor, and some lecturers are also run a research program.
Could you explain the differences, please?
So it really depends on what's written in your contract. So how I stipulated that you may be a research assistant professor, a teaching assistant professor, or an assistant professor in the traditional sense, where it's 40% teaching, 40% research, and 20% service, or however the breakdown is.
Service.
Professors sit on committees, doing different things. That's part of your job.
Service. So the panel session you just had, is that part of your service?
That was actually not technically part of my service. It is in a way because it's service to the community, but it's not service to the university. So usually when they're thinking about service, they primarily focus on service to the university and service to your department or faculty. Sitting on student committees, attending departmental hiring sessions, giving feedback on prospective new hires, sitting on scholarship committees. It depends on the institution you're at, sitting on admissions committee.
Disciplinary commissions?
Depending on the institution you're at, sitting on admissions committees.
Admissions, okay. I thought I had disciplinary.
I mean, that could also be a service, depending. So, for example, sometimes disciplinary committees for cheating allegations, it would be made up of professors, students, and that the professors on it would be doing a service to the university.
Interesting. This is the first time I've ever heard about that. It's also written within your contract to be of service, in your role. I always thought they were just zealous lecturers and zealous professors.
So some places don't explicitly state it. It's sort of implied that you should do it, but other places do explicitly state you have a certain service obligation.
So does Waterloo explicitly state
Yes,
it?
it does.
Nice. Apart from that part of your contract, what other parts of the interview process do you think people are just not privy to in general?
So one of the things, there's the teaching lecture. That's because at Waterloo a lot of teaching is involved, so they expect you to be able to teach. The other is also the research seminar talk. So you give as because I do research as well, I gave a talk at all the institutions I applied to on what my research background is and what my future research program will entail. And then there's what's called a chalk talk.
The what?
A chalk talk.
Okay.
So the chalk talk is depending on which institution you're at. But nowadays it's more modern, so it's not you actually going up in front of a blackboard with a piece of chalk, but you can. It's sometimes a whiteboard.
So that's why it's named like that.
Sometimes you have slides. Most times you don't have slides, but it's basically you're meeting with the faculty in the department that you want to be hired in. So you're a biomedical engineer, and let's say that you're looking for an assistant professor position in biomedical engineer. You want to be research stream, and so you give your teaching lecture, you give your research seminar where you talk about all the research that you've done previously, and then you will meet with all the faculty that are in your department in a closed room setting where you will go over what are your research plans? And they can ask you any questions. They might ask you, okay, so this particular thing that you say you're planning to do, when do you plan to do that? How do you plan to do that? How many students do you need to do it? What equipment do you need to do it? Where are you going to get funding from?
By how many students? They mean like how many postdoc?
Yes, how many trainees?
PhDs,
Yes.
graduate students. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. And just as a matter of curiosity, how many students do you have at the Peart Lab right now?
I have two PhD students, one master's student, and an undergrad. My first student is a master's student. He just defended his master's in December.
Oh, lovely. How'd that go?
It went well. He passed, so good job.
Lovely. Interesting. And do you know, like, off the top of your head, do you remember like his topic?
Oh yes, because it's it's what our lab works on. So because it's a research-based master, so it was the contributions of ESRP to the intestinal epithelium.
Intestinal
Epithelium. So we talked about the skin, which is the epidermis, and it's also an epithelial made of epithelial cells. But epithelial cells line a lot of the layers and cavities of our body. So your skin is an epithelial layer. The lining of your intestines also is an epithelial layer called the intestinal epithelium. So you have it in your small intestines, your large intestines, the spine of your stomach, lots of tissues.
Interesting.
So he was looking at what are the roles this particular protein
plays
in
in it. Huh. Interesting. People are really smart. And I really like that. I do. It tickles me that like people are actually truly passionate about dedicating their lives to study such detailed topics. That's, I don't know, to the layman, at least to the people not in their departments, it seems like a lot of information. But when you break it down like that, I'm like, it's great that we have someone studying that, because I sure wouldn't. It really is great. So for the undergraduates listening to us who may want to someday be professors, right? You went from a teaching assistant to a research assistant, but this was during your PhD.
So
in the University of Texas.
So I did a PhD at the University of Texas, and so when you enroll in the PhD program, because it was in the US, I didn't have to do a master's first, so I went straight from undergrad at the Bachelor of Science, and then the first couple of years you're you're in the PhD program, but you're not a PhD candidate until you pass your qualifying exam. So after you pass your qualifying exam, you then become a PhD candidate, and in the end you defend your PhD, and once you defend your PhD, you then have your PhD. But during that process, you can have lots of experience. The primary focus of the PhD is to do research, and so you're working primarily as a research assistant. You might have the opportunity to be a teaching assistant depending on the institution you're at. So where I was at, we did not have an undergrad, and we're mostly a grad program, so we didn't have a teaching requirement at all. But I did have the opportunity to do a teaching assistant position, to work in a teaching assistant position for cell biology class, and so they were piloted it and they tried it out, and I also got to teach a lecture on, what was it? The microtubules. Yes, in cell biology. Yeah.
In what?
Cell biology.
Cell biology.
That was the course.
So, like, what would you say is the major difference between the responsibility of a teaching assistant and a research assistant?
So, a teaching assistant, your job is to assist with deliver of course materials for a lecture, whether it's for grad school or a grad course or for an undergraduate course. And so you're maybe assisting with writing exam questions, maybe assisting with marking, with proctoring, maybe assisting with giving a guest lecture. As a research assistant, however, your job is, depending on what type of research you're doing, but I will speak from a wet lab scientist perspective.
Wet lab.
So we think of our research as dry lab or wet lab.
Wet lab, okay.
Dry lab being computational, so you're all on a computer. Wet lab being you're in a lab coat, you're working with a pipette, beakers,
chemistry.
things. Yeah. So when you're a research assistant there, your primary job is to be doing research. So however your research question is going to be answered, you're there doing that. And so the two are different roles completely.
Oh.
And so after I finished my PhD, I then did a postdoctoral fellowship.
Yes.
And during my postdoctoral fellowship, your primary focus there is also to gain additional experience, but also perhaps to develop independence or develop a research question that you can take to independence.
Yeah.
Depending also what you want to do after your postdoc, if you want to go in industry, if you want to go into teaching, if you want to go into research in academia, you can choose other things to get involved with. So when I was a postdoc, I took the opportunity to also be a teaching assistant. So I was helping mark exams, write exam questions, attending the lectures that the professors would give so that we could write the exam questions and then grade it and then distribute it to the students, supervise discussion sections, which is basically students meet with the students to talk about either papers that they were supposed to have read or go over
In-office
problem sets.
sessions, basically.
It's not really an in-office session, it's more like a class session.
Oh,
a
okay.
class session because we didn't have office hours for TAs.
Oh, yeah. I remember not having office hours actually. So my question would be, should you not have gone through that experience of being a teaching assistant, do you think it would have made a difference in how you currently approach teaching, like undergrads, postgrads, so on and so forth? Or do you think that TA experience was essential for right now?
I don't know if it's essential because interestingly enough, not a lot of people have that experience. I think it's beneficial. It's very beneficial. But I think how you're going to teach is going to be a reflection of the institution that you're at, because they have their own culture and habits for teaching or norms for how teaching content is supposed to be delivered. But I do think having been a teaching assistant was a great experience that I think is only beneficial to me because I can take the experience that I had. If I had gone into this cold turkey, that would have been tough. I mean, and granted also all my teaching assistant experience was for graduate courses, not for undergraduate courses. So,
you got lucky.
So I did not teach. So when I was teaching that undergraduate course last term, that was my first time teaching undergrads.
Like fresh out of high school.
Well, not even fresh out of high school. They were third year undergrads. So at least they had some
skin in the game.
Yes, prior experience. I don't know how I would have done with fresh out of high school.
You got to say this is like
it's a little scary to think about. I mean, I think I'd want a little bit more practice first.
Yeah.
Because at least with them being third year, there's sort of an expectation of a level that they should be at.
Yeah.
Whereas fresh out of high school, take a lot of different high schoolers.
Yes, from vastly different experiences, and then you have to find a way to marry all of that into one course that they're all supposed to pass.
Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine the pressure, but this is a very, very good segue. Still talking about your teaching assistant experience, I wonder, did that give you like an insight into what you should expect from your current teaching assistants, research assistants, and PhDs and postdocs that work with you right now?
Yes, it did. In terms of the research assistant position, it did set my expectations of what I expect. But one of the things they always tell us is, do you not expect your trainees to be like you, or do you not expect your trainees to be you? Because their life circumstances, their experiences, their background, where they're coming from is going to be completely different, and how they approach the work is going to be different than how you do it. Also, one of the things is, at this stage, I've come in with some experience with things that I've been working on for a while, whereas the students or trainees might not have that same experience because of the fact that when I first started grad school, I had a pipette, but I didn't know to do all the things I currently know how to do, and so you have to learn.
Yeah.
But I still do have an expectation of the quality that should come out of it. So, for the teaching assistant, however, because I taught grad students, and also because I was at an Ivy League school, it's a bit different.
How so?
For example, the work expectations of or maybe it's not even an Ivy League school, maybe it's just the difference between the Canadian system and the US system. The expectations of what the teaching assistant, or maybe it's a private school versus a public school, the expectation of what the teaching assistant does is different too.
So, you want to share?
For example, when I was at Penn as a teaching assistant, like I mentioned, we would attend lectures. We would write the exam questions. So it was the TAs who wrote the exam questions. The TAs who marked the exams.
By Penn, you mean University of Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Okay.
Here, it's the professors who write the questions.
Yeah.
The TAs assist with marking, but they're not the ones writing the questions.
Oh, interesting. So, like, just because of, I guess, the general expectation of like quality and excellence when it comes to Ivy Leagues, like, there's just more responsibility.
Maybe, but like again, it was a grad course, and the TAs were all grad students and already they were senior grad students. Or myself, I was a postdocs, so they have experience.
You know what? Now that I recall, I think one of my lectures, while like as a master's student, was taught entirely exams and all scored by a PhD candidate. So that's very possible. I do see that. Huh. Now, okay, I think you've already spoken to this, but I'm vaguely aware of the academic expectations for like the different levels of grad students. So could you like I guess briefly just touch on each of them? So for instance, for course-based master students, for research-based master students, for PhD, for postdocs, or
Okay. So a course-based master's is really you're taking courses or classes and you're not really expected to generate anything novel. You're expected to get more in depth in a particular area, but not necessarily create something new. A research-based master's, you're expected to get some technical expertise, maybe generate something new, but that's not necessarily an expectation. A PhD, you're expected to generate new knowledge that is defensible or prove something or show something. A postdoc, you're expected to do the same thing that you're doing in a PhD, but you're also expected to have some independence and also be able to create new avenues for investigation. You're supposed to also be able to do that as a PhD student, but the level of expectation, the level of independence that you're expected to have as you go through these different stages increases. So when you're a master's student, you might require a lot more babysitting than when you're a postdoc. As a postdoc, if I hired a postdoc, I would not want to be babysitting them.
Only come to me with the results.
And necessarily, yes, more along the lines. I would say this is the research question that we're asking. These are the tools that we have. Go work on it, come back, and we can figure out the things together.
So would you say you see postdocs more as kind of like colleagues?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I like that. Speaking of colleagues, what does office politics look like in academia? Because when I look at it from my perspective, I'm like, you all just have your separate classes to teach, your separate research to do, and like you don't have to cross paths except absolutely necessary.
No, because of the fact that we're in a community, and as I mentioned, there's a service component. So you have to work with different things, and sometimes you're working with people who are not working in the same area that you're working with, and so there can be a lot of politics where you don't want to step on anyone's toes. Also, because of the ladder in which you rise through academia, I'm an assistant professor tenure track. I'm not yet tenured. I will have to go up for tenure. Parts of things that will determine whether I get tenure. Am I a good researcher? Am I acknowledged in the international research community? Have I published so that I'm recognized in the international research community? And even if all those things are good, also do I have funding? But if everybody in my department dislikes me, I don't know if they'd want me to be there permanently.
You know, it's absolutely fair enough. So like, do you end up having to do like, so in corporates, we always talk about how, you know, you have to socialize a lot, you know, you kind of have to be a people person. And like you said that you were evaluated a couple times and they were like, you are not a people person. You should not be in academia.
So it's not necessarily, I don't know if it's the same level of socialization that corporate requires, because I've never worked in corporate, I will say, so I can't really speak to that kind of environment. But it might be, I'm not going to badmouth someone's research unless they're doing something unethical.
Yeah.
And then you go through the correct channels to make it known that they're doing something unethical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are those channels often anonymous at the very least?
Depending on their stage. You want it to be.
Okay, very good. If you're a junior staff, stay as anonymous as possible.
Yeah, you don't want to be like going, and you want to be more diplomatic about how you approach things. And sometimes you will, what's that expression? Toss the waves.
Ruffle feathers?
Ruffle feathers, yes, that's one way of putting it. But yeah, because I can't remember the other one. But yes, you will ruffle some feathers, and sometimes feathers do need to be ruffled because sometimes people are very set in their ways of how they do things.
Indeed.
But I feel like you have to toe the line a little bit too. There's certain things you're just like, yeah. But once I am on the opposite side, that's not going to happen.
That's not going to fly.
Yes.
So, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing this time and this space with us. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Jessica.
Absolutely. So before we head to our final question, that's a little bit more on a lighter note, I'm going to tell you guys at least a couple of things I've learned during this session. First and foremost, I've learned that there is indeed a corporate ladder to be climbed, or rather, a career ladder to be climbed within academia. Oh, we didn't even get to talk about pay, but do you mind maybe giving us a range?
So depending on, again, it really depends on the institution that you're at. And the university, the country. So let's say I'll give, for the US, for example, at a R1 institution, and R1 is a research-intensive institution that does primary research. So you can think of, like, for example, University of California, University of Texas, any of the Ivy League schools. It's I guess it's dependent on state, but let's go with Pennsylvania. You will an assistant professor will start at like 120,000.
Okay.
That's the minimum. And then once you get promoted to associate professor, that's the time you get your next significant bump. And then when you get full professor, you get another bump up. The thing that they always say in academia is whenever you're starting, you want to negotiate your starting salary, because your starting salary is what's going to determine how much you can make in the end, because there's no other time where you can, there's no real time when you can sort of go in and say like, oh, I want to actually see if I can get a raise here. There's no such thing like that in academia. You just basically, whatever your pay is, there's a structured way in which it increases.
Oh, interesting. So like there's like, I guess, a percentage increase,
Yes.
is it?
So like, for example, in Ontario, we have like a previously there was a cap on the amount of increase that you would have until it was deemed unconstitutional, but it would be a 1% increase each year on your salary. It was deemed unconstitutional because, one, it wasn't even matching what was it, the rate of inflation.
Oh my goodness.
But like until 2023, I believe that it was capped that you can have more than a 1% increase in salary. And so like if you said you started at let's say you started at University of Waterloo and your starting salary was 100,000 that you negotiated for, that means each year you'd have to have a 1% increase on that. It's since changed to reflect
Inflation at the very least.
But if you said you were $100,000, when you then get up to associate professor, say that there were no such thing as increases, it would just be $100,000, you're assistant professor for 5 years, then you get tenure, so you become associate professor, you then bump up from 100,000 to 110,000. It's not a huge jump.
That's nothing. When you think about like taxes inclusive, like this, there's not much left.
And then when you go from associate professor to full professor, you might go from 110,000, again assuming that there are no increases, it's just a flat salary all throughout. It goes from 110,000 to 130,000.
Interesting.
But
interesting, and I'm a little disappointed. Pay our teachers, please, please, properly too.
The people will say for Ontario, because we live in Ontario, there's the sunshine list. So our salaries are all listed, so you can see what we make. And it's not 100,000, but it's because the sunshine list is for anybody who makes over $100,000. But that basically sets how much your increase is, and you can figure out based on the. That's one of the things I did when I was going in. I was negotiating my salary. I looked at other assistant professors. I knew what the increases were. I looked at, okay, I knew this person was hired in this year. The sunshine list says that this is their salary now, so I can then backtrack to see how much they were initially started at. And then I said, okay, based on inflation and the fact that you were hired here, but now it's this year, this is how much you need. This is my starting salary.
Oh, that's very smart.
That's how I did it.
Very, very smart. Actually, I'm really trying to.
I didn't actually say it like that. Sorry, I said I'd like this range to be considered for my starting salary rather than say I need this exact starting salary. I give them a range.
That's what they advise people to do, even like within corporate. Like give them like the upper 5% as the range. So if like what's listed for your salary is like maybe 60K to 115, tell them I want a range of 95K to 115. You know, so they don't go any lower.
You don't want to go on the lower side.
No, you do not. Actually, like as a closing statement, actually, do you want to tell us your expectations for, I guess, the future of academia within Canada? So, like, what do you currently think can change, and like what's perspective within the job market that you think can affect that change?
I think one of the biggest things that's affecting this is probably the thing that's affecting everybody is really AI.
Yes.
And I haven't seen it to that extent yet in Canada. God knock on wood. But the concern of replacing teachers with AI robots, which I'm just like, you still do need the person involved. AI can only do so much. People do need to be able to critically evaluate things and be guided along a certain path, or shown that they can explore other ways, and that's part of the role that a teacher plays. One of the things that the world is facing is the fact that we do have an abundance of PhDs for very few academic positions in comparison. So you have to find something. If you have to be aware of the fact that even if you have a PhD, you might not go into academia. You have to think about other ways in which you can use your PhD. And then in terms of what the future of academia is going to be, I think we're already seeing it. I think one of the things that's going to be a lot more collective in terms of how we do research. Our university pushes a lot for us to do interdisciplinary research, except even though it's very poorly defined what interdisciplinary research is, and
they're like, go talk to your colleagues.
I will have issues on how they foster community for us to do interdisciplinary research. I do have issues with that, but it is, I think, the way of the future. I think you can't just focus on one narrow way of thinking. You have to be like open to thinking about it in different ways.
Different ways. I like that answer. I really do. That just tells me that there is in fact a future for my biomedical engineers in the Peart lab. take that with a cup of salt, please. But yeah, thank you so much again for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was fun.